The wagon wheels groaned against the hard-packed earth, each rotation bringing Clara Whitmore closer to a future she couldn't quite envision. She clutched the folded marriage contract in her gloved hands, the paper damp with perspiration despite the dry heat that pressed down on the prairie like an iron. Across from her, another woman sat rigid as a fence post, her own papers visible between white-knuckled fingers. They'd been traveling together for 3 days now, yet neither had spoken beyond the briefest courtesies. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, burnt grass the color of old leather, scattered rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth, and mountains in the distance that shifted from purple to black as clouds passed overhead. The wind carried red dust that settled in every fold of clothing, every crease of skin. It tasted of minerals and endings. "Redemption Creek ahead," the driver called out, his voice rough from tobacco and trail dust. Clara's stomach tightened. Through the wagon's canvas opening, she could see the town materializing from the heat shimmer, a collection of weathered wooden buildings huddled against the vastness like survivors of some great catastrophe. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and rust, making even the shabby structures appear momentarily beautiful. The other woman, Josephine, she'd overheard the driver say, finally met her eyes. They shared a look of mutual understanding, the kind that passes between people standing at the edge of an unknown precipice. Then the wagon lurched to a stop, and the moment shattered. "End of the line, ladies," the driver announced, already climbing down to retrieve their trunks. Clara gathered her traveling dress and stepped down first, her legs unsteady after days of constant motion. The ground felt strange beneath her boots, too solid and unforgiving. Behind her, Josephine descended with more grace, her city-bred elegance intact despite the journey's hardships. They stood side by side in the dusty main street, two mail-order brides who'd answered advertisements from men seeking wives in this forgotten corner of the frontier. Around them, the good citizens of Redemption Creek had begun to gather, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Two mail-order brides stepped off the wagon, someone whispered, the words carrying on the wind like a prophecy. Both on the same day. That's bound to bring trouble. Clara scanned the crowd for Samuel Morrison, the widower who'd promised her a home and respectability in exchange for companionship and help raising his 2 young boys. She'd memorized his photograph, thin face, kind eyes, prematurely gray hair, but no such man appeared. Beside her, Josephine seemed to be conducting her own search. "Do you see anyone who might be Mr. Theodore Banks?" she asked quietly, the first real words they'd exchanged. "No." Clara's voice came out hoarse. "I don't see Mr. Morrison either." The crowd began to disperse, their initial interest waning. The women stood abandoned in the street, their trunks at their feet, as the sun continued its relentless descent toward the mountains. The temperature was already beginning to drop, and Clara knew from experience how cold the desert could become after dark. An elderly woman in a flour-sack dress approached them, her face creased with what might have been sympathy or satisfaction. "You two the mail-order brides?" "Yes, ma'am," Josephine answered when Clara couldn't find her voice. "I'm expected by Mr. Theodore Banks and Mrs. Whitmore here is to marry Mr. Samuel Morrison." The old woman's expression shifted to something Clara couldn't quite read. "Oh, dear hearts, nobody told you." "Told us what?" Clara managed. "Samuel Morrison got kicked in the head by a horse 2 weeks back. Buried him in the cemetery east of town. As for Theodore Banks," she shook her head. "That scoundrel lit out for California 6 days ago. Took his savings and his brother's wife with him." The words hit Clara like physical blows. She'd sold everything, endured her brother-in-law's anger, traveled 2,000 miles to marry a dead man. Beside her, she heard Josephine's sharp intake of breath. "What are we supposed to do now?" Josephine's cultured voice had lost its steadiness. The old woman shrugged. "That's between you and the good Lord, though I'd suggest finding somewhere to stay before nightfall. Desert's no place for women alone after dark." She shuffled away, leaving them standing in the deepening shadows. The town seemed to close in around them, every window a watching eye, every doorway a reminder that they had no place here. "We need shelter," Clara said, forcing herself to think practically. "And we need to figure out our next move." "The hotel. Do you have money for a hotel?" Clara asked gently. "Because I spent my last dollar on stage fare." Josephine's silence was answer enough. They were still standing there, paralyzed by the magnitude of their situation. When he appeared, he came from the direction of the stables, leading a gray horse, his spurs ringing against the packed earth with each step. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made other men step aside. Dark hair showed beneath his worn hat, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. His clothes were practical: canvas pants, leather vest, a gun belt worn with the casual ease of long familiarity. He stopped when he saw them, his dark eyes taking in their travel-stained dresses, their abandoned trunks, the growing darkness. Something flickered across his weathered face. Recognition of their plight, perhaps, or simply the instinctive caution of a man who'd learned to read trouble. "Ladies," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep, roughened by wind and solitude. "You waiting on someone?" Clara found herself unable to look away from him. There was something in his bearing, a quiet strength mixed with an indefinable sadness, that made her heart beat faster despite her circumstances. "We were," Josephine answered when Clara remained silent. "It seems we've been disappointed." He studied them for a long moment, and Clara had the unsettling feeling he understood their entire situation without need for explanation. "Sun's going down. Desert gets cold enough to freeze water this time of year. You have arrangements for the night?" "No," Clara admitted. He seemed to wrestle with something internally, then came to a decision. "My ranch is an hour's ride north. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe. You can stay the night, figure things out come morning." "We couldn't impose," Josephine began. "It's not an imposition. It's necessity." His tone brooked no argument. "Unless you'd prefer to take your chances with the coyotes and worse." Clara knew they had no real choice. The temperature had already dropped 10 degrees, and she could see her breath beginning to mist in the air. "Thank you, Mr. Carver, Luke Carver." He was already moving to load their trunks onto a small wagon he must have left by the stables. "Can one of you handle a wagon team?" "I can," Clara said, surprising herself. She'd learned during her marriage, one of the few useful things to come from those dark years. He nodded, handing her the reins to the wagon while he mounted his gray. "Stay close. Trail gets rough in the dark." They left Redemption Creek as the last light faded from the sky. Two women who'd come seeking new lives and found only abandonment, following a stranger into the vast darkness of the frontier. The stars emerged one by one overhead, cold and distant as the promises that had brought them here. Clara gripped the reins and tried not to think about what morning would bring, or why the broad back of Luke Carver, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, made her feel safer than she had in years. Beside her, Josephine sat silent and straight, her own thoughts hidden behind a mask of composure that Clara suspected was as fragile as her own. The wagon rolled on through the darkness, carrying them away from one uncertain future toward another, while somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled its loneliness to the indifferent moon. Luke Carver's ranch emerged from the darkness like something carved from the mountain itself. The main house was built of gray pine logs, weathered to the color of old bones, with a stone chimney that rose black against the star-scattered sky. Behind it, the mountains loomed like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in shadow. Outbuildings, a barn, a smokehouse, what might have been a bunkhouse, stood scattered across the property like afterthoughts. The sound of wolves echoed from somewhere in the distant hills, making Clara's hands tighten on the wagon reins. Luke dismounted smoothly, moving to help them down with a courtesy that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Welcome to the Double C," he said simply. "It's not much, but it'll keep the cold out." The inside of the house revealed more about its owner than any words could have. Everything was functional, built with skilled hands but without a woman's softening touch. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was handmade, a solid pine table, 2 chairs, a bench along one wall. Books lined rough-hewn shelves, their spines showing wear from repeated reading. A rifle hung above the mantel, and various tools were arranged with meticulous care on pegs by the door. Luke set about building up the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. "There's stew in the pot," he said without turning. "Help yourselves. I'll see to your trunks." When he'd gone back outside, Clara and Josephine stood awkwardly in the dancing firelight, 2 women from different worlds thrown together by cruel circumstance. Finally, Josephine broke the silence. "I suppose we should introduce ourselves properly," she said, removing her traveling gloves with careful precision. "I'm Josephine Hale, from Boston." Clara Whitmore. Clara moved toward the pot hanging near the fire, needing something to do with her hands. "From Ohio, originally." "And what brought you to answer a matrimonial advertisement, Mrs. Whitmore?" Josephine's tone held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Clara ladled stew into the wooden bowls she found on a shelf, her movements automatic. "My husband died 2 years ago. His brother inherited everything, including, he seemed to think, certain rights to my person." She kept her voice steady, matter of fact. "When I refused him, he made my life unbearable. The advertisement seemed like escape." "I'm sorry," Josephine said quietly. She accepted the bowl Clara offered. "I suppose I was escaping too, in my way. My family has money but very definite ideas about what constitutes a proper life for a woman of our class. When I refused my 3rd proposal from a perfectly suitable boor, they decided I was becoming an embarrassment." Clara studied her companion more closely, despite the dust of travel. Josephine's breeding showed in every line of her posture, the way she held her spoon, the quality of her dress, even though it was practical traveling wear. "So you answered an advertisement to spite them?" "To free myself," Josephine corrected. I thought out here I could be something more than an ornament in someone's parlor." She gave a bitter laugh. "Instead, I'm stranded in the wilderness, dependent on the charity of strangers." Luke returned then, carrying both their trunks as if they weighed nothing. He set them near the wall and moved to serve himself from the pot. "There's a room through that door," he indicated with a nod. "Was my sister's before she married. You're welcome to it. You're very kind, Mr. Carver." Clara said, "We're grateful. It's not kindness." He settled into a chair, his dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. "Just what's right. Can't leave women alone on the prairie with night coming on." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of wind around the eaves. Clara found herself studying Luke covertly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, but his face carried the weathering of hard years. His hands, wrapped around the bowl, were scarred from work but surprisingly gentle in their movements. "If you don't mind my asking," Josephine ventured, "how long have you lived here alone?" Something shifted in Luke's expression, a deepening of the shadows around his eyes. 3 years, give or take. "Your sister lives in Denver now with her husband." He rose abruptly, carrying his empty bowl to the wash basin. "I'll check the horses. You ladies should get some rest. We'll figure out your situation come morning." After he'd gone, Clara and Josephine explored the room he'd indicated. It was small but clean, with a bed large enough for 2, a washstand, and hooks for clothing. Feminine touches lingered, dried flowers in a vase, a piece of embroidery half finished in a basket, a mirror with a painted frame. "He's hiding something," Josephine observed as they prepared for bed. "Some grief or guilt." Clara thought of the careful way Luke had avoided certain topics, the loneliness that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. Most people out here are running from something. They lay in the narrow bed, 2 strangers forced into intimacy by circumstance. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and bringing with it the scent of sage and snow. "What will we do?" Josephine whispered into the darkness. "Survive. Clara answered, "Find work if we can. Save money for passage back east if we must. I can't go back." There was steel in Josephine's voice. "I won't." Clara understood. She couldn't go back either, not to her brother-in-law's house, not to the whispers and judgments of neighbors who'd wondered why she refused such a practical arrangement. "Then we'll find another way." Sleep came slowly, and with it dreams of empty horizons and promises broken before they could be kept. Clara woke once to the sound of footsteps on the porch, steady and measured. Luke, she realized, keeping watch against the dangers of the night. The knowledge brought an unexpected comfort, and she drifted back to sleep feeling safer than she had in months. Morning arrived with a dust storm. Clara woke to the sound of wind shrieking around the house like something alive and angry. Through the window, she could see nothing but a wall of reddish-brown dust that blocked out the sun. The house shuddered under the assault. They found Luke in the main room, securing shutters and checking the chinking between logs. "Storm came up fast," he said by way of greeting. "Could last hours or days. No telling." "Days?" Josephine's voice rose slightly. "Welcome to the frontier." He moved to the stove, where coffee was already brewing. "At least you're not stuck in a wagon or out in the open." They passed the morning in strange domesticity. Luke showed them where things were kept, how to work the temperamental stove, where he stored supplies. Clara found herself taking inventory. Plenty of dried beans and salt pork, flour and cornmeal, preserves that must have been his sister's work, enough to last through a siege, which this might well become. As the storm raged outside, they were forced into proximity. Josephine discovered Luke's books and asked permission to read. Clara found mending that needed doing, grateful for the familiar work. Luke cleaned his rifle and checked his ammunition. Movements automatic from long practice. "You've been kind to us," Clara said eventually, breaking the companionable silence. Most men wouldn't have bothered. Luke glanced up from his weapon. "My mother raised me to believe a man's worth is measured by how he treats those who can't defend themselves." A shadow crossed his face. "Haven't always lived up to that, but I try." The storm intensified as the day wore on, the house becoming a small island of warmth and light in a world gone mad with wind and dust. They played cards with a worn deck Luke produced, told stories of places they'd been, carefully skirting around the deeper wounds they all carried. As night fell again and the storm showed no signs of abating, Clara realized something had shifted. The three of them, thrown together by chance and necessity, had found an unexpected ease with each other. She caught Josephine watching Luke with an expression of intrigued interest when he laughed at something she'd said. She felt her own heartbeat quicken when his hand accidentally brushed hers while reaching for the coffee pot. It was dangerous, this warmth growing between them. They were two women with no prospects, sheltering in the home of a man they barely knew. When the storm passed, they would have to face the harsh realities of their situation. But for now, with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling within, Clara allowed herself this moment of peace, this fragile connection forged in the heart of the wasteland. The storm broke on the third morning, leaving the world scoured clean and strange. Clara stepped onto the porch to find the landscape transformed, drifts of red dust piled against buildings like snow, the mountains sharp-edged against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The air tasted of minerals and new beginnings. Luke was already at work, clearing dust from the well and checking on the horses. He moved with the easy efficiency of a man comfortable in his own skin, and Clara found herself watching longer than was proper. When he glanced up and caught her gaze, she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We should return to town today," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "And do what?" He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "You have no money, no place to stay, and no prospects. Town's not exactly friendly to women in your situation." "Our situation is not your concern, Mr. Carver," Josephine said from the doorway, though her tone held no real reproach. "We'll manage somehow." Luke studied them both, then shook his head. "Mrs. Henderson runs the general store. She's been looking for help since her daughter married and moved away. And Tom Morrison at the restaurant could use another cook. It's honest work, if you're willing. You'd speak for us? Clara asked, surprised. My word carries some weight in town. He turned back to his work. Get your things together. We'll head in after breakfast. The ride back to Redemption Creek felt different than their desperate flight 3 nights before. The town appeared smaller in daylight, less threatening but also less promising. People stopped to stare as Luke's wagon rolled down Main Street, and Clara could practically hear the gossip starting. The Luke Carver with those 2 mail-order brides. Been staying at his ranch. I heard. Shameful is what it is. Luke seemed oblivious to the whispers, or perhaps just indifferent. He stopped first at Henderson's General Store, a cluttered establishment that smelled of pickle brine and leather. Mrs. Henderson, a bird-like woman with sharp eyes, looked them over with obvious suspicion. These are the women you mentioned? Mr. Carver? Her tone suggested she'd hoped he'd been joking. Mrs. Whitmore and Miss Hale, Luke confirmed. Both educated and reliable and in need of honest work. Mrs. Henderson's gaze lingered on their dusty but quality dresses. Can either of you do sums? I kept the books for my husband's business, Clara said quietly. I can show you references. References from back east don't mean much out here. The woman's expression softened slightly. But if Luke vouches for you, $3 a week plus a room upstairs. You'd help with customers, inventory, cleaning. It's hard work. I'm not afraid of hard work, Clara said. And you? Mrs. Henderson turned to Josephine. I'm afraid I have no experience with shopkeeping, Josephine admitted. Luke interjected smoothly. Tom Morrison needs kitchen help at the restaurant. Miss Hale's educated background would be an asset dealing with suppliers and keeping accounts. They made their way to Morrison's restaurant, a modest establishment that served the Cowboys, merchants, and travelers passing through. Tom Morrison, no relation to Clara's intended husband, was a gruff man with kind eyes who agreed to give Josephine a trial period. $2 a week in meals, he offered. There's a small room off the kitchen you can use. By noon, both women had positions, though the accommodations were far from what they'd imagined when they'd answered those advertisements. Luke helped carry their trunks to their respective lodgings, then prepared to leave. Thank you, Clara said, catching his arm as he turned to go. You saved us. You saved yourselves. His dark eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. I just pointed the way. After he left, the reality of their situation settled in. Clara's room above the store was barely large enough for a narrow bed and washstand. The walls were thin. She could hear every customer below, every creak of the building, but it was hers, earned by her own efforts, and that meant something. The next weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Clara rose before dawn to prepare the store for opening, swept floors, stocked shelves, dealt with customers who ranged from polite to openly hostile. Some women refused to be served by her, making their disapproval of that mail-order bride clear. Others were cautiously friendly, curious about her story. She saw Josephine during their brief lunch breaks, comparing notes on their experiences. The restaurant work was hard on Josephine's soft hands, but she bore it with surprising grace. It's still better than suffocating in Boston society, she said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Luke came to town every few weeks for supplies. He always stopped at the store, purchasing necessities with careful consideration. Their conversations were brief, proper, but Clara found herself looking forward to them with increasing anticipation. There was something in the way he asked after her well-being, the way his eyes lingered on her face. That made her pulse quicken. She noticed Josephine had similar reactions when Luke ate at the restaurant. The younger woman would emerge from the kitchen to serve him personally, their exchanges filled with a subtle tension that made other customers take notice. The gossip, predictably, was relentless. Both of them sweet on Luke Carver. Clara overheard Mrs. Pendleton saying to her companion while pretending to examine fabric, after he took them in, Two, some women have no shame. And him entertaining it, the other woman tutted. Though I suppose after what happened with Mary. They moved away before Clara could hear more, but she'd gathered enough from other overheard conversations to piece together the truth. Luke's wife had died 3 years ago, along with their infant son. During a cholera outbreak, he'd blamed himself for not getting them to a doctor in time, for choosing to homestead so far from town. The guilt had driven him into isolation, working his ranch alone, refusing social invitations and potential courtships. Until now. The situation came to a head during the Autumn Harvest Festival. The entire town gathered in the square, lanterns strung between buildings, fiddle music filling the air. Clara had debated not attending, knowing the gossip it would fuel. But Mrs. Henderson insisted she help run the store's booth. She was arranging jars of preserves when Luke appeared, dressed in his best shirt and freshly shaven. Evening, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Carver. She fumbled with a jar, nearly dropping it. I didn't expect to see you here. Haven't been to a town gathering in years, he admitted. Figured it was time. He paused. Would you honor me with a dance later? Before she could answer, Josephine materialized beside them, lovely in a borrowed dress. Luke, how wonderful to see you. I was just telling Mr. Morrison how you promised me a dance at the next town gathering. Clara felt something twist in her chest. She didn't remember any such promise, but Josephine's smile was brilliant, confident. Luke looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. That is, of course, you must dance with Miss Hale, Clara said quickly, hating how small her voice sounded. If you'll excuse me, I need to tend to the booth. She busied herself with meaningless tasks, trying not to watch as Luke led Josephine onto the makeshift dance floor. They made a handsome couple, Josephine's fair beauty complementing Luke's dark strength. The townspeople certainly noticed, whispers following their movement. Later, when the dancing had become general and Clara thought herself safely invisible, Luke found her again. That dance, Mrs. Whitmore? I don't think that would be wise, she said quietly. People are already talking? Let them talk. His jaw set stubbornly. I'm asking you to dance, not proposing marriage on Main Street. Despite herself, Clara allowed him to lead her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was properly placed but warm through the fabric of her dress. They moved together easily, as if they'd done this before. Josephine's a lovely dancer, Clara observed, needing to fill the silence. She is, Luke agreed. Then, quieter, but she makes me feel like I'm performing in a play. With you, he trailed off. Yes? It feels real. Clara's breath caught. Around them, couples swirled in the lamplight, but for a moment it seemed they were alone in the world. Then the music ended, reality intruded, and they stepped apart. She noticed Josephine watching from the edge of the floor, her expression unreadable. The younger woman had been nothing but friendly since their arrival, but Clara recognized the look in her eyes. They were both falling for the same man, and in a town this small, with their reputations already compromised, the situation could only end badly. That night, alone in her narrow room, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to organize her tumbled thoughts. She'd come west to marry one man, found herself attracted to another, and now competed with a friend for his attention. It was like something from the sensational novels her mother had forbidden her to read. But this was real life, with real consequences. Whatever happened between the three of them, Clara knew the delicate balance they'd maintained couldn't last. Hearts would break before this was over, and in a place like Redemption Creek, broken hearts had a way of destroying lives. The attack came at dawn, 3 weeks after the Harvest Festival. Clara woke to the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire. Through her small window above the store, she could see riders streaming into town, 15, maybe 20 men, their faces masked with bandanas, firing their guns into the air. Windows shattered along Main Street as townspeople dove for cover. She dressed hastily, hands shaking as she fumbled with buttons. Mrs. Henderson was already downstairs, her face pale but determined as she loaded an old shotgun. "The Garrison gang," the older woman said grimly. "Been hitting towns along the stage route. They're after the Wells Fargo shipment that came through yesterday." More gunfire erupted outside. Clara peered through the window to see the outlaws converging on the bank. Some had dismounted, kicking indoors, while others remained on horseback, controlling the streets. A man who tried to run was shot down in the dust. "We need to get to the cellar." "Mrs." Henderson said, but before they could move, the store's door exploded inward. 2 outlaws entered, guns drawn. One was young, barely out of his teens, with wild eyes above his mask. The other was older, calmer, more dangerous. Well, the older one drawled. "Ladies, you're going to show us where Henderson keeps his cash box." "There's nothing here." "Mrs." Henderson said steadily. "The store money goes to the bank every evening." The younger outlaw backhanded her, sending her sprawling. Clara rushed to help her, anger overcoming fear. "Leave her alone. She's telling the truth." The older outlaw grabbed Clara's arm, yanking her upright. "Pretty thing, aren't you? Maybe we'll take you along for entertainment." The shot came from the doorway. The outlaw holding Clara spun away, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Luke stood silhouetted against the morning light, rifle steady in his hands, his face carved from stone. "Let them go," he said quietly. "Now." The younger outlaw raised his gun, but Luke was faster. The boy's weapon flew from his hand as Luke's bullet found its mark. Both outlaws scrambled for the door, the wounded one cursing viciously. "You all right?" Luke asked, not taking his eyes off the street. "Yes," Clara managed, helping Mrs. Henderson to her feet. "How did you—" "Saw the dust cloud from my place? Figured trouble was coming." He moved to the window, assessing the situation outside. "They've got the bank surrounded. Sheriff Palmer's pinned down behind the water trough." More riders appeared, townsmen and ranchers responding to the attack. Clara recognized Tom Morrison, Josephine's employer, among them. The outlaws, caught between the bank and the growing resistance, began falling back, firing wildly. "Stay here," Luke ordered. "Keep away from the windows." He disappeared into the chaos outside. Clara watched through a crack in the shutters as the battle intensified. The sound was deafening, gunfire, shouting, horses screaming. Dust and gun smoke filled the air, turning the morning into twilight. She saw Luke take position behind an overturned wagon, picking off outlaws with methodical precision. Other men joined him, forming a defensive line. The tide began to turn. Then she spotted Josephine. The younger woman had emerged from the restaurant, a medical bag in her hands. She must have been helping with the wounded. An outlaw on horseback bore down on her, gun raised. Josephine froze, the bag falling from nerveless fingers. Without thinking, Clara grabbed Mrs. Henderson's shotgun and rushed outside. The gun was heavy, unfamiliar, but her husband had taught her to shoot years ago. She raised it, sighted, squeezed the trigger. The recoil knocked her backward, but the blast caught the outlaw's horse, sending both animal and rider tumbling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Luke, his face tight with fear and anger. "I told you to stay inside." "Josephine!" Clara gasped. He looked, saw Josephine helping a wounded man to cover, safe for the moment. His grip on Clara's arms tightened. "Don't ever do that again. If something happened to you—" Another volley of gunfire cut off whatever he'd been about to say. He pushed Clara toward the store's doorway, then returned to the fight. The outlaws were in full retreat now, riding hard for the edge of town, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The silence afterward was almost as shocking as the battle had been. Slowly, townspeople emerged from hiding. The cost became clear. 3 citizens dead, half a dozen wounded, property damage throughout Main Street. But the bank vault remained intact, the gang driven off. Clara found herself in the restaurant, helping tend the wounded alongside Josephine. They worked in efficient silence, cleaning wounds, bandaging injuries. Luke appeared, a graze along his temple bleeding freely. "Sit," Clara ordered, guiding him to a chair. "It's nothing," he protested, but submitted to her ministrations. Josephine brought water and clean cloths. As Clara worked, she was acutely aware of how close the three of them were. She could feel Luke's breath on her wrist. See the worry in Josephine's eyes as she watched. "You saved my life," Josephine said quietly. "That rider would have killed me. Anyone would have done the same." Clara replied, concentrating on cleaning Luke's wound. "No," Luke said firmly. "Not anyone. That took courage." Their eyes met and held. In that moment, Clara saw something in his gaze that made her heart race. Admiration, concern, and something deeper, more dangerous. "I should check on the other wounded," Josephine said abruptly, moving away. As Clara finished bandaging Luke's head, he caught her hand. "What you did today, you could have been killed. So could you. So could any of us." She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "I've lost people before," he said roughly. "I can't. I won't go through that again. Luke, promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't take risks like that again." The intensity in his voice shook her. "I can't promise that, not if someone I care about is in danger." Something shifted in his expression. He released her hand slowly, as if it cost him effort. "Someone you care about?" Before Clara could answer, Sheriff Palmer appeared in the doorway. "Luke, need to talk to you about organizing patrols. Gang might circle back." Luke stood reluctantly. "We'll finish this conversation later," he told Clara, his tone making it a promise. After he left, Clara found Josephine on the restaurant's back step, staring at the mountains. The younger woman's composure had finally cracked. Tear tracks marked her dusty cheeks. "I've never seen death like that before," Josephine said. "In Boston, it was hidden away, sanitized, but here—" Clara sat beside her. "It's the reality of this place, beautiful and terrible in equal measure." "Like him," Josephine murmured. They both knew who she meant. Clara felt the weight of their unspoken competition, heavier now after the morning's violence. Luke had shown his concern for both of them, but his reaction to Clara's danger had been different, more personal. "I think I've fallen hard for that rugged cowboy," Josephine said, echoing the townspeople's whispers with bitter humor. "Foolish, isn't it? A Boston society girl thinking she could make a life with a man like Luke Carver." Clara's throat tightened. She could offer comfort, deny her own feelings, step aside. It would be the kind thing, the proper thing. But the morning's violence had stripped away pretense, leaving only raw truth. "We don't choose who we fall for," she said quietly. "And he hasn't chosen either of us." Josephine studied her with knowing eyes. "But he will, won't he? Eventually, he'll have to—" As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on the blood-stained street, Clara knew she was right. The delicate balance between them had been shattered like the windows along Main Street. Whatever happened next, their careful friendship, their mutual respect, even their tentative happiness in this harsh land, all of it hung in the balance. The sound of hammers began as townspeople started repairs, trying to restore order to their shattered community. But some things, Clara thought, couldn't be fixed with hammer and nails. Some breaks ran too deep, especially in matters of the heart. The jealousy began as whispers and glances, subtle as smoke but just as choking. In the weeks following the outlaw attack, Clara noticed the change in how she and Josephine moved around each other. Where once they'd shared easy conversation during their lunch breaks, now silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. When Luke came to town, they found reasons to be visible. Clara, arranging the store window just so. Josephine emerging from the kitchen to personally serve his table. The townspeople noticed. Of course, in a place like Redemption Creek, such drama was better than any traveling show, like watching cats circle a mouse. Clara overheard Mrs. Pendleton saying to her companion, "Though that Luke Carver's no mouse, he knows what he's doing, keeping them both dangling." But Clara didn't think Luke knew at all. She watched him struggle with the situation, saw the confusion in his eyes when Josephine laughed too brightly at his words. the way he tensed when Clara found excuses to touch his arm while reaching for goods on high shelves. He was a man who'd lived in solitude for 3 years, suddenly thrust into the center of the emotional storm he hadn't sought. The tension crystallized on a golden October afternoon when Luke appeared at the store, his manner more agitated than usual. "Need to speak with you," he said to Clara, glancing around the empty store. "Privately." Clara's heart jumped. "Mrs. Henderson is in the back. We can step outside." "No." He ran a hand through his dark hair. A gesture she'd learned meant he was wrestling with something difficult. "Not here. Too many eyes. Would you ride out with me, just to talk? I'll have you back before dark." She knew she should refuse. An unchaperoned ride would fuel gossip for weeks. But the look in his eyes, confused, almost pleading, undid her resolve. "Let me get my shawl." They rode in silence at first, leaving the town behind for the open prairie. The aspens had turned gold, shimmering in the breeze like coins scattered across the mountainsides. Luke led them to a small grove near a creek, where ancient cottonwoods provided shelter and privacy. He helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I'm not good at this," he said abruptly. "Talking, explaining things. Take your time," Clara said softly. He paced to the creek's edge, staring at the water. "After Mary died, my wife, I swore I couldn't go through that again. Losing someone, it nearly killed me." He turned to face her. "Then you and Miss Hale arrived, and suddenly I'm feeling things I thought were dead and buried." Clara's breath caught. "Luke, the problem is, I'm feeling them for both of you." The words came out harsh, frustrated. "You're so different, but Josephine makes me remember what it was like to be young, to see the world as full of possibility. She's like sunshine, all light and warmth." Each word was a small wound, but Clara forced herself to remain still, to listen. "But you," his voice softened, "with you, I feel understood. Like I don't have to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen, didn't change me. You've known loss too. I see it in your eyes." "Yes," Clara whispered. "I have." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I can't keep doing this. It's not fair to any of us. But I don't know how to choose. How do you choose between sunshine and understanding? Between starting over and accepting what is?" Clara felt tears threaten, but refused to let them fall. "Perhaps you don't have to choose today. That's just postponing the inevitable." His hand rose as if to touch her face, then fell. "Josephine asked me to escort her to the church social next week. Half the town expects me to say yes. The other half is betting I'll ask you instead. And what do you want?" "I want to stop feeling like I'm betraying someone no matter what I do. I want—" He stopped, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter what I want." "It's the only thing that matters," Clara said firmly. "Luke, you can't live your life based on town gossip or trying not to hurt feelings. Someone will be hurt regardless. The question is whether anyone will find happiness at the end of it." He studied her face intently. "And if I said I wanted to escort you to the social, would that bring you happiness?" Clara's heart thundered in her chest, but she forced herself to think beyond the moment. "It would bring me joy," she said carefully. "But it would also hurt someone I've come to care about, and I'm not sure stolen happiness at the expense of a friend's pain is worth having." Something shifted in Luke's expression, surprise, perhaps, or admiration. Most women would have said yes immediately. "I'm not most women." Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. "And despite what the town thinks, I didn't come here to steal anyone's man. I came to build a new life. You're building it," Luke said quietly. "With or without me, you're building something strong." They rode back as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. As they neared town, Clara saw a familiar figure outside the restaurant, Josephine, watching their approach, even from a distance. Clara could read the hurt in her posture. Luke saw her too. His jaw tightened. "I've made a mess of this." "We all have," Clara said. The question now is how we clean it up." He helped her dismount outside the store, and for a moment they stood close in the gathering dusk. "I need time," he said, "to think, to figure out what's right." "Time is the one thing we have plenty of," Clara replied, though her heart ached with the lie. Time was what they didn't have, not with winter approaching, not with the town watching, not with two hearts hanging in the balance. She entered the store to find Mrs. Henderson waiting, arms crossed. "Girl, what are you thinking? Riding off alone with him when everyone knows Josephine Hale is sweet on him?" "We just talked," Clara said wearily. "Talking's how it starts." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "I like you, Clara. You're a hard worker and honest, but this situation with Luke Carver will bring nothing but grief. Mark my words." That evening, as Clara prepared for bed in her small room, she heard a soft knock. She opened the door to find Josephine, still in her work dress, eyes red-rimmed but determined. "May I come in?" Clara stepped aside wordlessly. Josephine entered, taking in the sparse furnishings, the narrow bed, the single window overlooking the alley. "I saw you return with Luke," Josephine said without preamble. "The whole town saw. Josephine—" "I'm not angry." The younger woman sank onto the bed's edge. "That's the worst part. I should be furious. You're my friend, and you went riding with the man but I'm just tired. And scared." Clara sat beside her. "Of what?" "Of losing everything again. I left Boston with such dreams of freedom, of building something new. Instead, I'm serving beans to cowboys and falling for a man who looks at me like I'm a pretty picture, but stares at you like you're home." The words hung between them, painful in their honesty. "He hasn't made any decisions," Clara said carefully. "Haven't you noticed?" Josephine's laugh was brittle. "He already has. He just doesn't want to hurt anyone by admitting it." She stood abruptly. "I won't compete anymore. Clara, I have too much pride for that, but I won't make it easy for him either. If Luke Carver wants to court you, he'll have to be honest about it. With me, with you, with himself. Josephine, I know you care for him too. I've seen how you look at him, how you come alive when he enters the store." Josephine moved to the door. "I just hope he's worth what this is costing us." After she left, Clara stared at the closed door for a long time. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, its lonely cry echoing off the mountains. She thought of Luke, wrestling with his conscience somewhere in the darkness, of Josephine, nursing her wounded heart, of herself, caught between desire and friendship, between the life she'd imagined and the one unfolding before her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pain, new choices. But tonight, she simply sat in her small room and listened to the wolf sing its sorrow to the indifferent stars. The letter arrived on a cold November morning, delivered by a well-dressed man who looked as out of place in Redemption Creek as a peacock among prairie chickens. Clara was arranging bolts of fabric when he entered the store, his eastern accent sharp as winter wind. "I'm looking for Miss Josephine Hale," he announced, brushing dust from his traveling coat with obvious distaste. "She works at the restaurant," Clara said, a chill of premonition running down her spine. "Across the street." The man tipped his hat perfunctorily and left. Through the window, Clara watched him enter Morrison's restaurant, and her unease deepened. Men like that didn't travel to frontier towns without serious purpose. An hour later, Josephine burst through the store's door, her face pale as parchment. "I need to speak with you, now." Clara led her to the back room, away from curious customers. Josephine's hands shook as she withdrew a letter from her apron pocket. "My father hired a detective to find me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That man, Mr. Hartley, he's here to bring me back to Boston. Father's given him legal authority, says I'm not of sound mind, running away to the frontier like this." Clara's stomach dropped. Can he do that? Father's a judge. He has connections, influence. Josephine's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "He's threatened to have me declared incompetent, committed to an asylum if necessary, unless I return immediately." and marry Mr. Worthington as planned. The bore you mentioned? The wealthy bore with political aspirations who needs a proper wife. Josephine sank onto a crate, suddenly looking very young. Mr. Hartley's given me until tomorrow morning to pack my things. He has 2 men with him to ensure I don't run. Clara's mind raced. We'll go to Sheriff Palmer. With what? A Boston judge's authority against a frontier sheriff? Josephine laughed bitterly. The law's on father's side? A unmarried woman under 30? Living unchaperoned in a rough town? Working as a serving girl? Any court would agree I need protection. They sat in silence, the weight of Eastern law and social convention pressing down on them even here, thousands of miles from Boston's proper streets. There is one thing, Josephine said slowly. If I were married, father would have no legal authority over me. A husband's rights would supersede his. Clara understood immediately. Luke, it would solve everything. I'd be free from father, protected by marriage, able to stay. Josephine's eyes held desperate hope. I know he doesn't love me the way he loves you, but perhaps in time. Josephine, no. Clara grasped her friend's hands. A marriage based on desperation isn't freedom. It's just a different kind of prison. What choice do I have? Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. I can't go back. Clara, you don't understand what it was like. The suffocation, the constant control, being treated like a decorative object with no thoughts or desires of my own. Before Clara could respond, the door burst open. Luke stood there, his face grim. Tom Morrison just told me about your visitor. Is it true? Josephine wiped her tears hastily. If you mean that my father's sent men to drag me back to Boston like a runaway child, then yes. Luke's expression darkened. Where are these men now? At the hotel. But Luke, there's nothing. We'll see about that. He turned to Clara. Can you close the store early? We need to get Josephine somewhere safe while I figure this out. I can't ask you to involve yourself, Josephine protested. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. The vehemence in Luke's voice surprised them all. You think I'd stand by while someone's forced into a life they don't want? Not in my town. They acted quickly. Clara told Mrs. Henderson she was feeling ill and needed to rest. Luke retrieved Josephine's belongings from the restaurant while avoiding Hartley's men. As dusk fell, they rode out of town, Josephine riding double with Clara, Luke leading the way. The temperature plummeted as they climbed into the foothills. Snow had already dusted the higher elevations, and their breath misted in the frigid air. Clara felt Josephine shivering behind her, whether from cold or fear she couldn't tell. Luke led them off the main trail onto a narrow path that wound between massive pines. In the gathering darkness, Clara could barely make out the way, trusting Luke's knowledge of the terrain. Where are we going? She called out. Old line shack about an hour up. Used it during roundups before I built the ranch house proper. Those city men won't find it. The shack, when they reached it, was hardly more than a one-room cabin built into the mountainside. But it was solid, with thick walls and a stone chimney. Luke quickly built a fire while Clara helped Josephine inside. I'll go back to town. Throw them off the trail, Luke said. Tell them Josephine lit out for Denver on the evening stage. They won't believe you, Josephine said through chattering teeth. Maybe not, but it'll buy us time. He checked his rifle, jaw set with determination. I'll bring supplies in the morning. Bar the door behind me. After he left, Clara and Josephine huddled near the fire, sharing the single rough blanket they'd found. Outside, wind howled through the pines, and occasionally they heard the distant howl of wolves. He came for me, Josephine said wonderingly. Without hesitation, Clara remained quiet, unsure how to respond. Luke's fierce protectiveness had surprised her too, revealing depths of feeling she hadn't expected. I know what you're thinking, Josephine continued, that he'd have done the same for any woman in trouble, and maybe that's true. But for a moment, when he stood in that doorway ready to fight for me, she trailed off. They dozed fitfully through the long night, starting at every sound. Dawn came slowly, pale light filtering through the single window. With it came the sound of horses. Clara's heart pounded as she peered out. 3 riders approached through the snow, Luke and 2 others. As they drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Palmer and, to her surprise, the circuit judge who visited Redemption Creek monthly. "It's all right," Luke called out. "Judge Morrison's here to help." They gathered in the tiny shack, the judge looking incongruous in his formal coat among the rough furnishings. He was an older man with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much injustice. "Miss Hale," he began formally. "Mr. Carver has explained your situation. While your father's legal authority is technically sound in Boston, we're a far piece from Massachusetts here. Territorial law has some interesting provisions about personal freedom and self-determination." Hope flickered in Josephine's eyes. "You mean, I mean that a woman who's established residency, gainful employment, and community ties in the territory has certain protections against being removed against her will." He smiled slightly. "Especially when the local sheriff and several prominent citizens are willing to testify to her good character and sound mind." "They do that?" Josephine whispered. "Tom Morrison's already signed an affidavit," Sheriff Palmer said. "Says you're the best help he's ever had. Mrs. Henderson, too, though she made sure to mention you could use improvement in your biscuit making." Through tears, Josephine laughed. "So I can stay?" "There'll be paperwork, possible legal challenges." Judge Morrison warned, "Your father might cut off any inheritance, but yes, Miss Hale, you can stay if you choose." Josephine turned to Luke and Clara, her face radiant with relief and something else, determination. "Then I choose to stay. Whatever comes, I choose freedom." They returned to town to find Hartley and his men at the sheriff's office, demanding action. Judge Morrison handled them with practiced authority, citing territorial statutes and presenting the gathered affidavits. Faced with legal opposition and the unified front of the townspeople, Hartley had no choice but to withdraw. "Your father won't be pleased," he warned Josephine coldly. "You're making a serious mistake. The only mistake," Josephine replied with quiet dignity, "would be going back." As Hartley's carriage rolled out of town, Clara found herself standing between Luke and Josephine, watching the dust settle. The crisis had passed, but she could feel the undercurrents of emotion still swirling between them. "Thank you," Josephine said to Luke, her voice soft with feeling. "You saved me." "You saved yourself," Luke replied, unconsciously echoing his words to Clara months ago. "We just made sure the law agreed." But his eyes, when they met Clara's over Josephine's head, held questions and uncertainties that had nothing to do with legal statutes. The immediate danger had passed, but the deeper conflict remained. 2 women, 1 man, and choices that would define all their futures. As snow began to fall, dusting the street with white, Clara wondered if spring would bring clarity or only more complications. In the frontier, she'd learned, freedom always came with a price. The question was whether any of them were prepared to pay it. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Luke stood on the ridge overlooking his ranch, wrestling with the decision that had kept him awake through the long winter nights. Below, smoke rose from the chimney of his house, a house that had felt too empty for too long. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Josephine's father's men. 3 months of careful distances, polite interactions, and unspoken feelings that hung in the air like morning mist. He couldn't continue this way. It wasn't fair to anyone. He'd known for weeks where his heart truly lay. Maybe he'd known from that first night when Clara had gripped the wagon reins with determined hands, refusing to show fear despite being stranded in a hostile land. Or perhaps it was the moment she'd stepped into the street with Mrs. Henderson's shotgun, ready to defend Josephine despite the danger. Clara, always Clara. The realization brought both relief and dread, because choosing meant hurting Josephine, who'd become dear to him in her own way. Her spirit, her courage in defying her family's expectations. These qualities stirred his admiration and protective instincts. But admiration wasn't love, and protection wasn't the foundation for a marriage. He rode into town with grim determination, knowing what he had to do. The conversation with Josephine couldn't be postponed any longer. He found her at the restaurant, preparing for the lunch crowd. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression must have warned her. The smile faded from her face. "We need to talk," Luke said quietly, privately. Tom Morrison, understanding, gestured toward the back room. "Take your time." They sat across from each other at a small table, the same one where months ago she'd served him coffee with trembling hands. Now those hands were steady, calloused from work, capable. "You've come to tell me you've chosen Clara," Josephine said before he could speak. Her voice was calm, resigned. "Haven't you?" Luke removed his hat, running his fingers through his hair. "Josephine, it's all right." She managed a tremulous smile. "I've known for some time. The way you look at her, it's the way my father never looked at my mother. The way Mr. Worthington would never have looked at me. You deserve someone who looks at you that way." Luke said earnestly, "You're remarkable, Josephine, brave and strong but not for you." The words were soft, without bitterness. "I think I knew from the beginning, but I hoped, well, it doesn't matter what I hoped. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. "I never meant to hurt you. I know." She stood, smoothing her apron with hands that trembled only slightly. "And despite everything, I'm grateful. You and Clara gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You fought for my freedom when my own family would have caged me. That means more than you know. What will you do?" Josephine moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered street. "Stay, of course. I didn't fight this hard for my independence only to surrender it for a broken heart." She turned back to him, chin raised. "Redemption Creek is my home now. I'll build my life here, with or without a husband. Perhaps I'll save enough to open my own establishment someday. A boarding house for women traveling alone, or a tea room, something respectable but mine." Luke stood, wanting to offer comfort but knowing it wouldn't be welcome. "If you need anything, I'll be fine." Her voice was firm now. "But Luke, don't wait too long to tell Clara. She's been patient, but even patience has limits." He left the restaurant feeling both lighter and heavier. The sun had climbed higher, melting snow from the rooftops in a steady drip. At Henderson's general store, he paused, gathering courage for a different kind of conversation. Clara was helping a customer when he entered, her movements efficient and graceful. She glanced up, and their eyes met across the crowded store. Something in his face must have conveyed his purpose because color rose in her cheeks. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said when the customer left. "Would you walk with me, Mrs.?" Henderson appeared from the back room, took one look at them, and sighed dramatically. "Go on, girl. Been expecting this for weeks. Just don't leave me short-handed too long." They walked to the small park at the town's edge, where cottonwoods provided shelter from curious eyes. The bench was cold beneath them, but Luke hardly noticed. Clara sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. "I spoke with Josephine," he began. "Is she all right?" The question, concerned first for her friend rather than what this meant for them, confirmed what Luke already knew. This woman's heart was as beautiful as her face. "She will be. She's strong." "Yes," Clara agreed softly. "Stronger than she knows." Luke took a breath, then reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "Clara, I need you to know, these past months, trying to sort through what I feel. I'm not a man who loves easily or often. After Mary, I thought that part of me had died." "But it didn't," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, it just needed the right person to wake it up." He turned her hand over, tracing the calluses that hard work had left. "I've made my choice. Made it weeks ago, if I'm honest. But I couldn't speak until I'd talked with Josephine, given her the honesty she deserved." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And now I'm asking if you'll have me, not as some mail-order arrangement with a stranger, but as a man who's come to love you for your courage, your kindness, your strength. I can't offer you wealth or an easy life. The ranch is hard work, the winters are brutal, and I'm not always easy to live with. But I can offer you partnership, respect, and a love that will last until my last breath." Clara was crying now, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Luke Carver, I came to this territory to marry a stranger out of desperation. Instead, I found work that gave me pride, a friend who became a sister, and a man who sees me, truly sees me, for who I am." She squeezed his hand. Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her close. There in the small park with melting snow dripping from the trees, and the whole town probably watching from windows. Let them watch, he thought. Let them see that sometimes love found a way despite the odds. When they finally parted, Clara's expression grew serious. "What about Josephine? I can't build my happiness on her heartbreak. She's already making plans for her future, independent plans that don't involve a husband." Luke smiled slightly. "I think she'll surprise us all." They walked back through town together, no longer hiding their connection. People stopped to stare, some nodding approval, others whispering behind their hands. At the restaurant, they saw Josephine through the window, serving customers with her usual grace. She looked up, saw them together, and after a moment's stillness, nodded once, a farewell and a blessing combined. "She'll be all right," Clara said, as much to convince herself as Luke. "We all will," Luke replied. "Eventually." That evening, as Luke rode back to his ranch alone, but not lonely for the first time in years, he thought about the strange paths that led to love. Two women had stepped off that wagon months ago, both running from different kinds of prisons. Both had found freedom. Though in very different ways, Josephine had discovered the strength to stand alone, to build a life on her own terms without the support of family or husband. That took a kind of courage Luke deeply admired. She would make her mark on Redemption Creek. He was certain of it. And Clara had found in him what he'd found in her. A partner who understood that some wounds never fully healed, that love after loss was both precious and frightening. They would build something together, carefully and slowly, aware of how fragile happiness could be. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Not lonely this time, but calling to its pack. Luke smiled and urged his horse toward home, knowing that soon it would truly be home again, filled with laughter and purpose and love. The circle was closing. What had begun with two mail-order brides stepping off a wagon would end with a wedding, but it would also begin something new. 3 lives forever changed by the courage to seek freedom in a harsh and beautiful land. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself had decided to bless the union. The prairie grass, dried to gold by the season, swayed gently in the warm breeze. The mountains stood witness in the distance, their purple peaks etched against a sky so blue it seemed painted. Clara stood before the small mirror in her room above the store, adjusting the simple cream-colored dress Mrs. Henderson had helped her make. It wasn't the elaborate gown she'd once worn to marry her first husband, but somehow it felt more precious, sewn with hope rather than duty. "You look beautiful," Josephine said from the doorway. Clara turned, surprised. She hadn't expected Josephine to come, though she'd sent an invitation. The younger woman wore a rose-colored dress that brought out the warmth in her complexion, and her smile, while tinged with melancholy, seemed genuine. "I wasn't sure you'd—" "Of course I came." Josephine entered the room, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I picked these this morning. Indian paintbrush, prairie roses, and sage, the colors of this land that's become our home." Clara accepted the bouquet, tears threatening. "Josephine, no tears today," Josephine said firmly. "This is a celebration. You found love in a place where we both expected only survival. That's something to rejoice in." She touched Clara's cheek gently. "Besides, I've been thinking about what you said months ago. about building something strong with or without a man. You were right. What will you do? Josephine's eyes sparkled with something that looked like excitement. Tom Morrison wants to retire next year. He's offered to sell me the restaurant if I can raise the capital. I've already written to a few investors back east, distant cousins who might find the idea of a woman-owned establishment in the frontier intriguing enough to back. That's wonderful. Clara gripped her friend's hands. You'll make it the finest restaurant in the territory. Perhaps. But today is about you and Luke. Josephine adjusted Clara's veil with practiced fingers. Be happy, Clara. Be so radiantly happy that it lights up the whole prairie. They made their way to the small church at the edge of town, where it seemed the entire population of Redemption Creek had gathered. Luke stood at the altar in his best suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome. When he saw Clara, his face transformed, the stern lines softening into wonder. Judge Morrison, who'd returned specifically to perform the ceremony, smiled at the assembled crowd. Dearly beloved, we gather today on this prairie, under God's vast sky, to witness something precious, the joining of two souls who found each other across great distances and through great trials. Clara barely heard the formal words. Her whole attention was focused on Luke, on the way his hands trembled slightly as he took hers, on the intensity in his dark eyes as he spoke his vows. Clara, he said, his voice rough with emotion, you came to this land seeking one future and found another. I offered you shelter for a night, and you gave me a reason to wake up each morning. I promised to protect you, to respect you, to work alongside you, and to love you until the mountains crumble and the prairie turns to sea. Clara's own vows came from the heart, unplanned but true. Luke, you showed me that strength doesn't mean standing alone, that there's no shame in accepting help or offering it. You saw me not as a desperate mail-order bride, but as a woman with her own courage and worth. I promised to stand with you through drought and plenty, through sorrow and joy, to make your house a home and your life a shared adventure. The rings, Judge Morrison prompted. Luke produced 2 simple gold bands. Not new, Clara realized with a start, but worn smooth with age. They were my grandparents, he explained quietly. Carried them through the Cumberland Gap, through Civil War and Reconstruction. Seemed fitting for a new beginning. As Luke slipped the ring onto her finger, someone in the congregation whispered loud enough to carry. 2 mail-order brides stepped off the wagon, and both fell hard for the same rugged cowboy. A ripple of gentle laughter passed through the crowd. Even Clara smiled through her tears, recognizing how their story had already passed into local legend, transformed by each telling. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, Judge Morrison proclaimed, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Luke. The kiss was gentle, appropriate for public viewing, but Clara felt the promise in it, of passion carefully banked, of nights no longer spent alone, of a future written together. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Clara's eyes found Josephine in the crowd. Her friend stood straight and proud, applauding with the rest. When their eyes met, Josephine winked and mouthed, Be happy. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables groaning under the weight of dishes the townswomen had prepared. There was dancing to fiddle music, toasts with Tom Morrison's best whiskey, and enough gossip to fuel conversations for months. Never thought I'd see Luke Carver smile again, old Sam the blacksmith said, slapping Luke on the back. You've worked a miracle. Mrs. Carver. Mrs. Carver. The name felt strange, but right, like a dress that needed wearing to fit properly. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Luke and Clara prepared to leave for the ranch. Their ranch now. Josephine approached as Luke loaded Clara's trunk onto the wagon. Luke, she said formally, then surprised them both by standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. Take care of her. Always. He promised. She turned to Clara, and they embraced tightly. Write to me, Josephine whispered. Tell me about ranch life. And when I open my restaurant, you'll be my first guest. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Clara promised. As the wagon rolled out of town, Clara looked back once. The wedding guests were still celebrating, lanterns beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Josephine stood apart, a slender figure in rose pink, watching them go. Then she turned and walked purposefully toward the restaurant, toward her own future, different from what she'd imagined, but perhaps richer for being chosen rather than expected. The ranch house looked different somehow as they approached, though nothing had physically changed. Perhaps it was the knowledge that this was truly home now, not a temporary shelter. Luke helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her up in his arms. "Tradition," he said gruffly, carrying her over the threshold. Inside, Clara found he'd made small changes. New curtains at the windows, fresh flowers in a vase on the table, the bed remade with a quilt that looked suspiciously like Mrs. Henderson's work. "I wanted it to feel like yours too," Luke explained, suddenly shy. "It does." Clara touched his face gently. "It feels like ours." Later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Clara reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. She'd answered an advertisement seeking a convenient arrangement with a stranger. Instead, she'd found work that gave her independence, a friend who taught her about courage, and a love deeper than anything her first marriage had offered. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "About beginnings and endings, about two desperate women who stepped off a wagon and found more than they ever dared hope for. Only one found me," Luke pointed out with a slight smile. "But both found themselves," Clara said, "and in the end, that might be the greater gift." In the distance, a wolf howled, not lonely now, but calling to its mate. Another answered from across the valley, their voices weaving together in an ancient song. The sound no longer frightened Clara. Like everything in this harsh and beautiful land, it had become part of home. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and eternal, blessing the small ranch house where two wounded hearts had finally found healing. And somewhere in town, in a room above a restaurant, another strong woman planned her own future, proving that not all happy endings required a wedding ring. The frontier had tested them all, with violence, heartbreak, jealousy, and fear. But it had also given them freedom, friendship, love, and the chance to become more than society had ever allowed. In the end, that was the true gift of the West, the opportunity to write your own story, no matter how it began. The candle burned low in the window as Luke and Clara retired for the night, beginning their life together in earnest. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under the stars, full of promise and possibility, just as it had been that day when two mail-order brides stepped off the wagon and changed 3 lives forever. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West, where love bloomed in the most unexpected places. Where are you enjoying this story from? Share your location in the comments below. Let's connect across the miles just as Clara and Josephine did. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and tell us what touched your heart in this frontier romance. Did you root for Clara and Luke from the beginning? Or did your heart ache for Josephine? Share your thoughts below.